Thanks for checking out the video today, everybody. This one I'm not going to be putting on my Blender channel because I feel like this is actually more of a SketchUp video. And I do want to use my main channel still for SketchUp. So what I want to show in this video is how I think that the push-pull and how you actually move faces around in SketchUp and Blender are actually probably closer than people think. I see a lot of people say like, oh, you can't push-pull. You can and you can. It doesn't function in the exact same way, but you can get very similar results. And in my opinion, Blender's actually probably a bit better in this case because it actually gives you a lot more options. So if you're interested in this, I hope you stick around to the end of the video and I hope you learn something. Okay, so the thing that I think confuses people the most is that the functionality seems to kind of be there between the two of them. It's just that sometimes Blender may do things in the way where it's not just the push pull, it's also when you hit M in SketchUp. So if you just hit M to move something, sometimes this is kind of the same function that you're going to get in Blender. So let's just simply move this cube out so that we can adjust the face. So we can grab this and let's move it out 10 feet. That's good enough. So we're just trying to make a rectangle here. If we come over to Blender, most people may say like, oh, you want to scale it. That's not what I actually like to do. I don't really use scale that much when I'm modeling, at least not for ArchViz because, or I should say this differently. I actually don't use it when I'm trying to change the size of cubes. What I'll do is I will click on the cube and go into edit mode. Now, I might be going a little bit fast for this because I'm not trying to get too far into Blender. I just want to show people kind of how that functions. So if I go into edit mode, I hit 3 to go into face mode, and then I click on this face, and then I just hit G and X, and I'll bring that out about 3 meters. And so then you can see that we have pretty much the same thing. So the thing that I think gets people and really confuses them about this is that in Blender, it has something called extrude. So what this does is this actually takes this face and it starts to extrude it out. But the biggest difference in this is that you now have this ring kind of going around it. So in SketchUp, if you just hit P, there's not going to be a ring. But if you hit Control P, then you have that. So Blender's extrude is actually closer to SketchUp's. This might even be just called extrude face, but it's kind of similar to how that works. And yeah, so that's something I think kind of messes with people. The other thing that I kind of wanted to show is if I just go back in both of these here. So in Blender, you can actually click on these two faces. And if you right click and go extrude along normals, this is going to make the object extrude depending on where that face is pointing. So if I do that and then drag up, I'm going to get this effect. And without using something like joint push pull, I don't think you can do this natively in SketchUp. You do just have to go push pull, Control P, hit Control again, and then double tab. So this is kind of where you're like, this is kind of going to give you the same thing. And over here, this is another part that kind of messes with people. So if I hit G and Z in the same way and I move up, it's going to give me this effect. Even though over here, it's giving me more of a push pull. It's because these vertices here, like these dots, are all linked kind of on the same line. So it's pulling this whole thing up. Vertices aren't really in SketchUp, at least to my knowledge. Without add-ons, you can only do the edge and face mode. So here I can click the face, I can click the edge. In Blender, I can actually click on the corner, the edge, and then the face by hitting 1, 2, and 3. But in SketchUp, if I hit P and go up, as you can see, there's no line here, but the face has moved up. Whereas if I hit G and Z here, it's going to do this. That's because in this particular shape, SketchUp is actually, what I'm actually doing is the equivalent of going in SketchUp, hitting M, and then locking yourself to the Z axis. So yeah, that's kind of how that one works. And this is what I mean about how the functionality is all there. It's just a matter of kind of getting used to using G and Z, extrude, and then extrude manifold, because I will show you this as well. So if I now go into Blender and I hit E and I go up, the line's going to be there. So it's the same as going P, controlling up inside of SketchUp. But maybe I don't want that. Maybe I want it to come up without this line. So this is where you can use a tool that's fairly new inside of Blender. I'll be honest, I actually don't really use it this much. This is something that, again, it's like you can do a lot of pretty interesting things inside of Blender already. So like I never had a problem with it. And in my opinion, this extrude tool may actually be better than Extrude Manifold, because in Blender, it is actually important that you try and keep all your faces to have 4 sides, just like a square, because it lets you do more with it. And it's just how Blender is supposed to read the object. So if I go over here and I just, all you have to do is click on it and then hold it in, you get this menu. So Extrude Manifold, what this is going to do is this is going to let me pull this up, and now we don't have a line. So the important thing to understand why Blender is grabbing everything and moving it up when it does this is because this face and this face here are sharing these vertices. So if I move one, it's going to interact with the other one. But what the Extrude Manifold does is it almost separates them out. So it's creating vertices at the top and down here. And hopefully this isn't kind of over the head of some people that are kind of watching this for the first time, because it can be a little bit weird. Because once you extrude this down, if I bring this down again, those vertices are actually still separated. So if I click one of them and drag it up, you can see it's like that. And so now I can hit GZ again and it's separated. It's just those vertices, I think, that really change all of this up. That's kind of why things can seem a little bit weird inside of Blender at first, because these vertices are not in SketchUp. If I want to merge them again, I just hit A, F3, merge by distance. And now it says at the bottom, remove 2 vertices. I can go back to this and then it does that. So something that I do really like about Blender, that it's not really in SketchUp, at least not to my knowledge, in an easy way. The only way I know how to do it in SketchUp is if you basically just drop a plane on it, is it's called loop cuts. So what the loop cuts lets me do is I can, in edit mode, I can hit Control R, and then I can just scroll up, and I get all these yellow lines. And then if I just click, left click, click again, now my face has all these lines in it, which can be really easy to use. And if I just hit E, I extrude that up. Maybe I'll click on this face, hit I. I'll delete this little light right there. Why can I not click? Oh. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to duplicate this over. I'm going to spin this. And then if I grab these faces, you can just easily do bridge faces here. Bang, they're connected. And that's something that I do like, that I find it's not as easy to do in SketchUp. Maybe I'm wrong about that, because I'm not going to sit here and pretend I'm the best SketchUp user, but I feel like I have used it a fair amount. So the drawing on faces is something that Blender doesn't do as well as SketchUp, but there's a lot of like ways to work around it. And truthfully, when you actually get good at Blender, or I shouldn't say that because I don't feel like I'm that great at Blender, but when you get more comfortable with Blender, you will notice that there's quite a few things that you did in SketchUp that you kind of complained about Blender at first, but then you never use them, because Blender's workflow is different enough that it never really comes up. And yeah, so I don't think that there's an easy way of making it so that these just bridge across. Whereas if I go back a bit here, and I'll throw in a loop cut here, throw in a loop cut here, I'll extrude these up, snap that there. Maybe I'll do like a loop cut here. And the snapping tool, that's another thing. A lot of people say like it's weird not to be able to snap stuff. The only difference between Blender and SketchUp in this sense is that you can turn it on and off in Blender. So there's a button up here that if you set this to increment, so it basically snaps it to the grid, I believe, or something similar to that, vertex, edge, face, volume. So there is snapping. It's just that you have to turn it on. That's really the only difference. In SketchUp, to my knowledge, you can't turn the inferencing off. Maybe there's a way that you can do that in the settings, but I think that everyone just leaves it on by default anyways. But if I click these faces now, and I just hit I, it will inset them. So it's the same as hitting F inside of SketchUp. And yeah, then I just right click, bridge faces, and then you have more geometry that you can play with. And if you grab two sides like this, and you hit I, bridge the faces, and it cuts a hole in them. So that's really the thing. That's kind of the same feature as doing this. So the push-pull in SketchUp is really nice for cutting holes like that. But what I would do is if I was in Blender and I had to cut a hole in something, I'd just make a little cube, go like this, and then I'd go Boolean. This is a modifier, so it's Boolean, cube, If I hide this cube, now there's a hole through it. And what is kind of nice about this is that if I actually come in here and I delete the cube, it's gone away. So you can, let me see if I can actually, wonder if I can hide this and then move it. Yeah, so this is kind of the way that it works is that whatever that cube touches in this object, it's going to get rid of it. So I do kind of like this because it has sort of the same functionality as push-pull in the sense that you can kind of chop through it like that. And then just like SketchUp, you can come in here, select all this stuff, and move it up and down. You're going to get some weird artifacts like that, at least when it's just going up and down, but it fixes itself after you let go of it. So that's just something I want to keep in mind. I think that pretty much sums up all the things I wanted to show with push-pull. I've never, like, once you get comfortable with Blender, it's not a problem being like, oh, well, SketchUp does this and this doesn't. You really can do everything that you want to do in SketchUp. And in my opinion, Blender is just a far superior software. Like, I have used both extensively, and especially for what I'm in, which is ArchViz, I think that Blender is really far ahead of SketchUp. That's why I've been trying to get everyone to go from SketchUp to Lumion to Blender to Lumion, because you will learn so much about ArchViz and it will make everything so much easier, and you have so many more tools to actually deal with all this stuff. The push-pull feature inside of SketchUp is not this SketchUp exclusive feature, I guess. The exact functionality of it maybe, but there are a lot of things you can do in Blender that are going to give you the exact same results, and Blender scales up much better than SketchUp. So I find organizing my scene, doing massive scenes, is so much easier inside of Blender, because if you try and bring in a model that has like 500,000 faces inside of SketchUp, then it will just absolutely melt. And in Blender, for example, if I go down, you can look at the tries here, and I'll just get rid of this Boolean. So if I go here, I go subdivision surface, I put it on simple, I crank it up. So I just brought this up to 800,000 triangles, and Blender's not even slowing down. Like, this is absolutely nothing. Like, we've easily hit 30 million triangles in some of our ArchViz scenes, and there's nothing to worry about. So that also makes Blender much better for dealing with data sets that have photo scanned landscapes, for example. That's something that even with Transmuter, I wasn't able to get into SketchUp looking half decent, because Transmuter is one of my favorite tools to use, and even it couldn't simplify everything down to what I wanted to use, whereas you can just import it into Blender, use a couple modifiers, and then it's good to go. So I hope everyone found this video interesting. Like I said, I feel like this was a little bit scatterbrained. I just wanted to show people that there is a lot of functionality in the way that the push-pull and extrude tools work inside of SketchUp and Blender. I said the exact same thing you may have said right now, where it's like, oh, well, I really wish I could do this stuff in SketchUp inside of Blender. But once you actually get used to Blender, you'll realize that you don't even really think about that, because the things that you thought were important in SketchUp, you really don't use them in the same way in Blender, and there's just better workarounds for it. I thought loop cuts were stupid at first, and they kind of felt like a weird way of doing it, but now that I'm more comfortable with it, I really, really like how it works, because it just keeps everything together, and it just helps, I guess, form the geometry in a way that makes sense, so that it's good to keep modeling with it. If you found the video interesting, I really appreciate it if you could give it a thumbs up, and also subscribe to the channel if you are not. There is going to be quite a bit more SketchUp to Blender tutorials in the next little bit, just because they just came out with a new SketchUp Importer, and I do really believe that SketchUp to Blender is a viable option. In this video, I was showing you kind of the difference between the two of them, but there's really nothing wrong with doing all of your work inside of SketchUp and then just rendering it inside of Blender like you would use for something like Lumion or D5, and it can give you really good results. It just takes a little bit of time to kind of get used to. I'm going to end the video there. For all of you that stuck around, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope I was able to shed some light on the situation. But for now, have a great night. I'll see you in the next one.